deep dive. We use research, lots of analysis to give you a real understanding of complex topics and fast. Today, we're taking a very specific kind of journey into history, looking through the lens of the 2013 film, Lincoln.
Yeah, our mission today is really laser focused. We're not looking at the typical cradle to grave biopic story. Instead, we're unpacking how our sources frame this movie. They see it as this intense, character-driven thing, focusing entirely on one huge piece of legislative strategy.
And wow, it was a strategy that was definitely needed back then. It's easy to forget the context, right?
Yeah.
But the research points out that Lincoln, his movie appearances right before this one, were frankly a bit absurd. Like vampire hunting, zombie smashing. Seriously,
Yeah.
So this film, Steven Spielberg directing, Tony Kushner writing, it thankfully zeroed in on the much more, well, authentic story. His ultimate political fight, getting the 13th Amendment passed to abolish slavery for good.
And what really jumps out when you look at the sources is just how narrow that scope is. I mean, this isn't the story of his whole life. Not at all. It really zooms in on just the last 4 months of 1864 and the first few weeks of 1865. This tight focus lets the filmmakers treat that whole 13th Amendment debate not as some footnote, but as the central, incredibly difficult legislative battle it actually was.
Okay, let's unpack this then, maybe starting with how the film sets up its pretty unusual tone.
Right. So the film kicks off well into Lincoln's second term. It's actually 2 years after the Gettysburg Address. We first see him meeting soldiers at the Petersburg battlefield. So right away, you get the sense of the war's gravity, but also the kind of personal cost for the president himself.
And that opening chat with the soldiers, it's really key, isn't it, for defining Lincoln's whole persona in the film. The sources really emphasize his, soft, measured way of talking, almost grandfatherly, but it commands immediate respect. It signals right off the bat, this isn't going to be an action flick. The drama's going to come from the conversations, the speeches, and, those famous Lincoln stories.
Yeah, and that structural choice is pretty striking, especially for a movie set right in the middle of the Civil War. One thing the sources really highlight is that there are basically no battlefield scenes after that opening bit. It's a character piece through and through. And the sources call that quite refreshing because it deliberately puts the real drama inside the halls of government. It argues that the legislative work, well, that was the truly heroic fight here.
That focus on the political inside rather than the military outside is fascinating. That's exactly what we want to dive into. But before we get right into that core battle, maybe we should quickly touch on the one element the sources called out as, well, a bit of a weakness. That subplot with Lincoln's oldest son, Robert.
Ah, yes, that's right. The sources do mention the son wanting to enlist. And the tension there between father and son and the emotional weight on Mary Todd Lincoln, it's there, but it feels a bit underdeveloped. It's described as sort of just happening as an aside. It doesn't quite have the same heat or engagement as the rest of the film's arguments. A minor point, maybe, but something the sources felt didn't quite land with the same impact as all the political maneuvering.
Okay, so if the big war is off screen and the family drama is kind of muted, then yeah, the whole weight of the story has to be on the action in Congress. Which brings us to the real core of this deep dive. We keep mentioning the 13th Amendment fight. Can we just quickly clarify for the listener why this was so vital? Didn't the Emancipation Proclamation already free the slaves? What was the permanent legal thing they were really fighting for here?
That is probably the single most important thing to grasp to understand the stakes here.
Yeah, the sources are really clear. The Emancipation Proclamation, which Lincoln issued back in 1863, that was an executive order. It was based on his wartime powers as president. Critically, it only legally applied to slaves in the Confederate States, the states actually in rebellion. It was fundamentally a measure of war.
Which means it was potentially temporary, contingent on the war ending a certain way. And maybe could be undone later by a different president or the courts once peace came.
Precisely. Exactly right. So the 13th Amendment, that was the push to make abolition permanent, constitutional across the entire United States, war or no war. It meant slavery would be banned everywhere, forever. And to get that done, Lincoln needed that 2/3 majority in the House of Representatives. That political math, that's what drives all the drama. What's fascinating here, then, is how the film manages to turn that legislative stuff, counting votes, trading favors, sometimes outright twisting arms into real high drama. The sources admit the plot doesn't exactly go anywhere per se in terms of physical action.
Right.
But the subject matter itself carries it all because the stakes were just
Yeah.
nation-defining.
And they weren't just arguing principles, they were literally fighting the clock. This Congress was the lame duck session. The sources really stressed the urgency. If they didn't pass the amendment before the session ended, well, the new Congress coming in had enough Democrats who'd campaigned against abolition that the amendment might just fail for good. The margin was terrifyingly thin. It meant they needed every single vote they could possibly buy, beg, or maybe even bribe.
Wow. Okay, so that really elevates the film, doesn't it? It goes beyond just a history lesson. It's like a masterclass in political maneuvering under just immense pressure. It's almost like, yeah, that description is perfect. A history textbook brought to life. It completely avoids any, popcorn stupidity, as the sources put it, and focuses on the real, perhaps less glamorous heroism and compromise and hard legislative work. And for you listening, this film really shows how the sort of mundane mechanics of government, the process itself, can actually be incredibly dramatic and world-changing. Now, to actually sell that kind of high-stakes, talky political battle, you absolutely need a central performance that holds it all together, and the sources hammer this home. What makes the movie work isn't just the script, it's Daniel Day-Lewis as Lincoln. And that role carried huge risks, right? I mean, anyone trying an Abe Lincoln impression usually ends up sounding kind of silly or cartoonish.
Oh, absolutely. The research spent quite a bit of time on this, noting that for the first few moments of Day-Lewis's performance, you're kind of holding your breath, waiting for it to fail, waiting for him to sound like, I don't know, a drunken uncle, as one source put it, but he just nails it completely. He threw himself so entirely into the character, giving this immediate, unshakable weight to that softer voice. It's this quiet strength, this weary wisdom that really contrasts sharply with all the shouting happening on the House floor.
And the physical transformation, too, that was part of it. The makeup, the aging.
Definitely.
What the material highlights is that Day-Lewis looks way older than he actually was, and noticeably older than Sally Field playing his wife, even though she's actually 11 years older than him in real life. He's got every wrinkle and worry a life of high stress would imprint. Plus, yeah, those truly awesome beards. That physical weariness just instantly tells you the weight of the war and this political fight he's carrying.
But the genius of the film's casting, really, is how the supporting actors work as these necessary political forces around Lincoln. We absolutely have to talk about Tommy Lee Jones as Thaddeus Stevens.
Yeah.
His performance is incredible, just stand out. He's Lincoln's cantankerous sometime friend and sometime rival.
Right. Stevens is portrayed as this really radical abolitionist, a force of nature in his own right. His wit is described as biting. His insults are masterful, apparently, and you really feel his personal drive for abolition. It's palpable. And that kind of abrasive intensity is so important, isn't it? It provides a necessary political counterweight.
Yes, this is a really critical insight from the sources. Lincoln, the guy telling soft anecdotes, trying to persuade, he could only really make the compromises he needed because someone like Stevens was pushing so hard from the radical side. Stevens' really hardline stance actually made Lincoln's compromises look more moderate, more reasonable, especially to those crucial swing votes. So the drama wasn't just Lincoln versus the Democrats. It was also Lincoln trying to manage his own fiery allies to nudge the whole center ground towards abolition.
That's interesting. And the research also mentions Sally Field's Mary Todd Lincoln. Complex, deeply troubled. Her portrayal also kind of highlights the president's isolation, doesn't it? He's juggling the war, the political backstabbing, this intense home life, and yet his focus in Congress stays remarkably calm and fixed on that end goal. So looking back at the overall assessment from the sources, the film gets overwhelmingly high recommendations. It's seen as this classy, detailed picture of a truly important man whose actions changed, well, a continent, maybe even the world.
Yeah, though there was that one final reservation mentioned about the slow pace. It did raise some questions about maybe its Blu-ray list status, its rewatchability for someone just looking for entertainment, but the historical importance and the sheer analytical depth, those are undeniable. And if we try to connect this to the bigger picture, the ultimate impact of the film, at least according to the sources we looked at, is how it shows the massive cost, the complexity of achieving something morally clear through, well, democratic means. It really focuses on the sheer importance of winning that 13th Amendment vote, turning what could be a dry procedural thing into this emotionally huge triumph that, yeah, makes an American patriotic heartbeat double time.
So what does this all mean then? Ultimately, the film is this deep character study wrapped around one of history's most vital legislative battles. And for you, the curious learner, it really demonstrates the power of focusing on the talk, the speeches, the gritty political deals, maybe over the big battlefield scenes when you're telling a story about massive historical change. It argues that persuasion, in the end, is the ultimate weapon.
And based on what we read, the film really presents this monumental victory, the permanent end of slavery, as coming down, in large part, to Lincoln's quiet, almost grandfatherly stories and the sharp, calculated wit of his political allies and enemies. Which does raise an interesting question, doesn't it? In what other key moments in history was it maybe humor or personal charm or just clever legislative compromise rather than brute force or grand public gestures that was the actual catalyst for world-changing events?